Welcome to the Deep Dive, your essential shortcut to being truly well-informed. Today, we're embarking on, well, a pretty fascinating deep dive into how India's economic landscape is being fundamentally reshaped. We're looking from the ambitious boardrooms right down to the very grassroots.
Yeah, we've got a stack of sources here that, really highlight the logic behind it all, the impact we're seeing, and even some of the challenges that are still cropping up in India's business ecosystem right now. It's quite a story.
Absolutely. And our mission for this deep dive is to explore three, let's call them cornerstone, business schemes. Think of them as key chapters in India's economic story. We'll unpack the Production-Linked Incentive Scheme, that's PLI. Then there's the Startup India Seed Fund Scheme, SISFS for short.
Right.
And also the Stand Up India initiative, which interestingly now includes the Drone Shakti program too. Together, these policies sort of paint a picture of, well, incentives driving industry, innovation sparking new ventures, and inclusion opening doors. It's all really sustained by the sheer grit of entrepreneurs and citizens.
It really is a compelling narrative. It shows how policy isn't just abstract rules. It's about actively trying to catalyze some profound real-world change.
So let's kick things off with arguably one of the most talked about policies recently, the Production-Linked Incentive, or PLI, scheme, launched back in 2020. It felt like a bold experiment then. How does PLI actually work? What's its core mechanism, really?
Well, what's really insightful here, I think, is how PLI isn't just about boosting production generally. It feels like a deliberate, almost surgical strike at a core economic imbalance India faced for decades. I mean, before PLI, our sources show India was importing something like 88% of its electronics and telecom components, a huge number.
Wow, 88%. So we were basically just assembling things.
Exactly. Assembly champions, as some put it. Building things by putting imported parts together, but not really manufacturing leaders, creating those parts ourselves. The government's thinking seemed pretty clear. Without strong domestic manufacturing, India couldn't really export at scale. And without exports generating the millions of jobs needed, especially for the young workforce, well, that becomes incredibly difficult.
Right, a jobs challenge.
Definitely. So PLI was effectively the government saying, okay, we're re-engineering our economic DNA. We need to become a manufacturing engine. The scheme itself, it's performance-based. A company invests, produces more than it did the previous year, and the government gives them cash incentives, usually between, say, 4% and 6% of those incremental sales.
So a direct reward for scaling up.
A very direct reward, yeah.
Yeah, the data on the impact, looking from 2020 to now, roughly 2025, is quite staggering. It really shows that re-engineering in action, we're talking over 1.76 lakh crore in private investments mobilized. That's huge.
It is. And then there's the output figure.
Yeah, 16.5 lakh crore of additional output generated. And this is meant to have created, directly and indirectly, over 12 lakh jobs. Significant numbers.
What's also striking, I think, is electronics exports crossing 1.25 lakh crore. That's about $15 billion, right, in the last fiscal year. And India becoming the second largest mobile manufacturing hub globally. That feels like a massive leap in just a few years.
It really does. And if you look sector by sector, you see, well, varied success, but still significant overall. Electronics, for instance, that's been a standout success story. Attracted around 60,000 crore investment, generated 4 lakh crore in output. Huge numbers there.
Okay. What about others?
Auto and EV, that's seen more moderate success, maybe 40,000 crore investment. Pharma and API active pharmaceutical ingredients, that's been pretty strong, about a 15,000 crore. Solar modules have drawn quite a bit of investment too, 24,000 crore, though the payouts are apparently still pending as those projects fully come online. Got it. So given these big numbers and the ambition, what's the broader economic take here? And are there any speed bumps, any challenges?
Yeah, good question. From an economic perspective, PLI is almost a textbook example of what they call a corrective industrial policy. It's actively steering India towards manufacturing-led GDP growth. And that's critical, as we said, for jobs, but also for reducing trade deficits and, importantly, mitigating global supply chain risks, something we all became very aware of post-COVID.
Right, resilience.
Exactly. It's not just jobs, it's national resilience, a kind of fundamental recalibration of India's global economic position. But yes, process. It's not without its friction points. The data does show only about 37% of the target production has been met in some of the lagging sectors.
Less than half.
Yeah, and the actual incentives dispersed are still under 10% for many sectors, which suggests maybe some bottlenecks in the process. Plus, there are reports of bureaucratic hurdles, especially impacting smaller businesses, the MSMEs, micro, small, and medium enterprises. They find it harder to navigate, perhaps.
Okay, so access for smaller players is an issue.
It seems to be. But despite these challenges, you have to say it represents a really radical and powerful policy shift in industrial strategy. Arguably the most significant since, well, the big liberalization back in 1991. It's imperfect, sure, but undeniably powerful in redirecting the economy.
Okay, so we've seen how policy is shaping big industry with PLI, a massive redirection.
Yeah.
But what about that spark of innovation? You know, the individual founder, maybe somewhere like Nagpur, with a brilliant tech idea, but no capital. That's where the next policy comes in, right? The Startup India Seed Fund Scheme, or SISFS.
Exactly. That's the scenario. Imagine you're that young graduate, you've got this incredible concept,
Yeah.
but you need, say, 20 lakh just to build a basic prototype, an MVP. And the banks, they're just not set up to take that kind of risk on an unproven idea. It's too early for them.
So SISFS bridges that gap.
That's precisely the core problem it aims to solve. The fundamental understanding behind it was that real innovation, the disruptive kind, it just doesn't happen without risk capital. And as our sources point out, private capital, venture capital, angel investors, they tend to be risk averse, especially at that very, very early idea stage.
They want to see some traction first.
Right. So this creates what economists call a market failure in early stage funding. The private market on its own isn't providing enough capital because the risks seem too high. So the government essentially stepped in and said, okay, we'll write the first check. The idea is to de-risk that initial phase just to get promising ideas off the ground.
That's a significant philosophical shift, isn't it? The government as the initial risk taker. And the scheme allocated a fair bit of money, due 945 crore, offering up to 20 lakh for, you mentioned MVP, minimum viable product validation.
Yep, proving the core idea works.
And then potentially up to 50 lakh for a full product launch. What seems smart is routing this through government-recognized incubators, over 300 of them.
Yeah, that's the mechanism, leveraging those existing entrepreneurial support systems, the incubators and accelerators that are already there.
And what's the progress been like by, say, 2025? What are the numbers telling us?
Well, under the broader Startup India umbrella, which SISFS is part of, the numbers are substantial. We've seen around 159,000 startups getting recognized officially. Specifically for SFFS, over 227 crore has been dispersed just to women-led startups, 1,278 of them, which is fantastic for inclusion in tech.
That's a great specific stat.
It is. And it's also contributed, they estimate, to about 1.7 million direct jobs. And of course, the headline number, 112 unicorns, those billion-dollar valuation private companies have emerged under this whole Startup India push.
And it's not just happening in Bangalore or Delhi, right?
No, and that's really interesting. There's strong activity reported in Tier 2 cities, places like Indore, Surat, Jaipur, even Guwahati and Kochi. It shows the impact is spreading geographically, which is really important.
Yeah, democratizing innovation in a way. And it's not just stats. There are real stories behind this. We found a great example, a startup in Madhya Pradesh. They built a solar-powered cold storage system for farmers. Really practical application, which is 18 lakh from SISFS. They apparently managed to scale their operations to 3 states and now employ 80 people. That's a tangible impact.
It absolutely is. And those individual success stories are so critical to highlight the potential. However, even with these successes, we do need to acknowledge the challenges. Our sources mention delays in dispersal, especially around election cycles, which can really hurt a cash-strapped startup.
Yeah, timing is everything for them.
Exactly. And the quality of mentorship and scaling support from some incubators, well, it can be patchy. Some are great. Others maybe lack the capacity to really help startups grow post-funding. And that links to another point. A high dropout rate after getting the seed funding. It suggests that just the initial capital isn't always enough, that ongoing support is really crucial for long-term survival and success.
Right, the money gets started, but scaling is a whole different challenge. So how should we interpret SISFS from that broader economic view? What's its role in India's big picture?
Well, I see it as a powerful microeconomic intervention, but with definite macroeconomic ambitions. It directly tackles that market failure in early-stage funding we discussed. By doing that, it's effectively building a critical innovation pipeline. It's nurturing the ideas today that could become the big industries of tomorrow. And as India aims to be, the third largest startup ecosystem globally, SISFS isn't just funding, it's kind of like the scaffolding holding up that very ambitious vision. It enables those first crucial steps and de-risks the whole entrepreneurial journey, at least initially.
Okay, that makes sense. Scaffolding for innovation.
Yeah.
All right, let's shift our focus now. Let's look at policies that aren't just chasing growth, but are also actively pursuing, well, justice and economic inclusion. This brings us to the Stand Up India initiative. This one provides loans, right, from 10 lakh up to 1 crore, specifically for entrepreneurs from scheduled caste, SC, and scheduled tribe, ST communities, and also for women entrepreneurs. And it's for greenfield businesses.
Yes, that greenfield part is key, meaning completely new ventures, starting something from scratch, not just expanding an existing family business, for example. And it really begs the question, why was such a targeted policy like this needed?
Yeah, what was the gap it was filling?
Well, historically, if you look at lending patterns in India, banks often preferred lending to established firms. And these were often, wealthier, typically upper caste, and male-owned. This created a really significant barrier, a kind of financial exclusion, for many marginalized groups. So Stand Up India is a very deliberate attempt to reverse that historical pattern. To tackle that exclusion right at its root by opening up access to capital, it's fundamentally changing who gets the chance to be an entrepreneur.
And the numbers suggest it's having an effect. The performance snapshot for 2024-25 looks quite compelling. Over 40,700 crore sanctioned. Supporting more than 1.8 lakh entrepreneurs, that's a lot of new businesses.
It is. And the stat that really jumps out.
The women beneficiaries.
Exactly. Over 80% of the beneficiaries are women. That is a huge driver of change in economic participation, empowering women entrepreneurs specifically. The key sectors benefiting seem to be things like food processing, rural retail, textiles, often areas where women have strong participation.
And again, there are powerful stories. We found one about a woman from Jharkhand. She used a 14 lakh loan from Stand Up India to start a mushroom farming unit. What started as just her idea has now grown into a business employing 25 other tribal women, and they're supplying hotels in Ranchi. That's not just a loan, is it? It's about economic dignity.
Precisely. Economic dignity, asset ownership, fostering self-reliance within communities that have often been left behind. It's a direct pathway to empowerment. It's transformational at that level.
And building on that sort of forward-looking theme, there's also Drone Shakti. This was launched in 2022, right? A push for India to become a leader in the drone economy.
Yes, a very aggressive push, actually. The projections were around 5,000 crore in sectoral investment, aiming for a turnover of maybe 900 crore by 2024 alone. It's about positioning India at the forefront. And the potential use cases are incredibly diverse, showing just how transformative this tech could be. Agriculture, obviously, but also infrastructure mapping, mining, logistics, even defense. It touches so many areas.
So, if we connect Stand Up India and Drone Shakti, what's the interpretation?
Well, if you look at them together, Stand Up India is fundamentally about promoting that economic dignity and asset ownership for marginalized groups, empowering them directly. Drone Shakti, on the other hand, it's a really forward-looking policy leap. Huge transformative potential, positioning India for a future tech wave. But, and this is important, its success really hinges on strong support for skill training code. People need to know how to operate and maintain these drones and building the necessary tech infrastructure across the country.
So potential, but needs support.
Definitely. But both schemes, though different, are fundamentally about expanding who gets to participate and benefit from India's growth story. They're trying to change the landscape of opportunity.
It's fascinating when you step back and look at all three, PLI, SISFS, and Stand Up India Drone Shakti. They don't feel like just individual initiatives operating in isolation anymore. They seem more like interconnected pillars, right? Each supporting India's broader economic transformation.
That's exactly the insight, I think. From an economic viewpoint, it looks like a deliberate, almost triangular approach to transforming the business landscape. You've got PLI, boosting large-scale production and exports, its strength. Attracting big industrial investment, FDI. The gaps, maybe MSME access, those sectoral lags we mentioned.
Okay, pillar one.
Pillar two, SISFS, fueling that grassroots innovation, its strength, creating startup density, job growth at the early stages, the gaps. Definitely needs better post-funding support, quicker dispersals.
Right, the scaffolding.
And then pillar three, Stand Up India and Drone Shakti, driving inclusive entrepreneurship and that tech leap. Strength. women-led growth, leveraging advanced tech.
Mm.
Gaps, mostly around the underlying infrastructure and the need for widespread skill training.
So putting it all together, it's like building manufacturing muscle with PLI,
Yeah.
injecting innovation energy with SISFS,
Mm.
democratizing access to capital and opportunity with stand-up,
Right.
and then trying to future-proof the economy with things like Drone Shakti.
Exactly. That combined strategy, it aims to hit several critical targets all at once. Create jobs, build globally competitive firms, and democratize access to capital and tech across society. It feels like a very comprehensive, multi-pronged approach.
Okay, so that's the big picture analysis.
Right.
What does this all mean for you, the person listening right now? How is this relevant? Well, if you're a student, maybe take this as a real-world case study. Applied economics in action. Understanding how these policies shape markets, create opportunities, manage risks, that's incredibly valuable, whatever you're studying.
Absolutely. And if you happen to be a startup founder, or maybe you're thinking about becoming one, this information is gold dust, really. You should definitely check out startupindia.gov.in. Go register. The pathways are there to apply for SISFS or at least connect with a DPIIT recognized incubator. That's the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade. They're the ones who officially approve these support organizations.
Good practical advice. And if you come from a rural background or an SCST community, or you're a woman entrepreneur looking to start something new,
Then standupmitra.in is the portal for you. It has resources specifically tailored for the Stand Up India scheme.
the key takeaway seems to be that India's policy ecosystem is opening doors, doors that were perhaps closed before. But as our sources seem to imply, you really have to actively walk through them yourself.
Yeah, the opportunities are expanding. They are designed to be accessed, but it requires that initiative.
Well, this has been The Deep Dive, aiming to give you that shortcut to being truly well-informed about the ideas shaping modern India. And remember, economics isn't just about abstract numbers on a spreadsheet. It's really about people. It's about who gets the opportunity to grow, to build something, and maybe even to lead.
Yeah, PLI, SISFS, Stand Up India, they aren't just schemes on paper. They're designed as bridges, you could say. Carefully engineered bridges.
Bridges to a stronger economy, certainly. Hopefully a more equitable future, too, and ultimately a more dynamic and prosperous India for everyone. We really encourage you to share this deep dive. Talk about it with your classmates, your colleagues, maybe your startup circle. Until next time, stay informed, stay inspired, and maybe keep asking yourself this question: how is policy shaping your future?